The desperate plea. The emergency beacon cut through the peaceful hum of the Zephyrian Alliance defense network like a blade through silk. Commander Lyra Voss felt her crystalline skin shift from its usual calm blue to an alarmed purple as she absorbed the devastating reports flooding her command center on Harmony Prime. 3 more colonies had fallen in the past cycle. Epsilon Centauri, New Haven, and the agricultural world of verdant fields were now nothing but lifeless rocks, stripped of all organic matter by the relentless advance of the Void Swarm. The numbers were staggering and horrifying. Over 40 million sentient beings, simply gone, consumed by the hungry darkness that swept across the galaxy's outer rim like a plague of living shadow. Lieutenant Commander Kyle, a Thornback whose usually steady demeanor now showed cracks of deep concern, approached Lyra's command station with heavy steps. His forearms moved in the traditional gesture of respect, but she could see the tremor in his movements that spoke of barely contained fear. "Commander, the latest tactical analysis from our science division," Kyle said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible news. "The swarm's expansion rate has increased by 30%. At this rate, they will reach the core worlds within 50 cycles." Lyra studied the holographic display that materialized before her, showing the galaxy in miniature. Red markers indicated swarm-controlled territory, spreading like an infection across the outer regions. Yellow markers showed worlds under immediate threat, while the green ones represented the dwindling safe zones where billions of Alliance citizens lived in growing terror. The Void Swarm was unlike any enemy the Alliance had ever faced. They were not a conventional military force with ships and technology in the traditional sense. Instead, they were a collective consciousness housed within dark, writhing biomechanical entities that could adapt and evolve in real time. They consumed everything organic they encountered, breaking down matter at the molecular level and incorporating it into their ever-growing mass. What made them truly terrifying was their intelligence. This was not mindless consumption, but calculated warfare. The swarm had learned the Alliance's tactics, adapted to their weapons, and found ways to counter every defensive strategy the galaxy's finest military minds could devise. They struck, with precision, targeting key infrastructure and population centers while avoiding heavily defended military installations until they had grown strong enough to overwhelm them. "Ma'am, Admiral Nexus is requesting immediate conference," announced Communications Specialist Zara, her antenna-like appendages vibrating with nervous energy. The young resonant's natural ability to interpret electromagnetic frequencies made her invaluable in coordinating fleet communications across vast distances. The holographic image of Admiral Nexus materialized in the center of the command chamber. The grizzled Vorthon commander had served the Alliance for over 2 centuries, and Lyra had never seen him look so defeated. His usually proud bearing was bent with exhaustion, and his multiple eyes carried a haunted expression that spoke of too many lost battles and failed strategies. "Lyra, I need your honest assessment," Admiral Nexus began without preamble. "Our conventional forces have engaged the swarm in 17 major confrontations. We have yet to achieve a single decisive victory. Our weapons barely slow them down, and every engagement costs us ships and personnel we cannot afford to lose." Lyra nodded grimly. She had been reviewing the battle reports for days, looking for any pattern or weakness they could exploit. The results were consistently demoralizing. The Alliance defense network was built on principles of measured response, proportional force, and the preservation of life. These doctrines had served them well in maintaining peace between member species for centuries, but they were proving inadequate against an enemy that recognized no such constraints. "Sir, our current tactics assume we are fighting a conventional enemy," Lyra replied carefully. "The swarm operates on completely different principles. They do not fear death because they do not truly die. They do not value individual survival because they exist as a collective. Every assumption our military doctrine is based upon simply does not apply." "That is what I was afraid you would say," Admiral Nexus replied heavily. "The Council has been in emergency session for the past 3 cycles. We have discussed every option, from evacuation protocols to scorched earth defensive strategies. Nothing we can do with our current capabilities will stop them. Through the vast transparisteel windows of the command center, Lyra could see the bustling activity of Harmony Prime's orbital shipyards. Hundreds of vessels were under construction, from small patrol craft to massive dreadnoughts. The Alliance's industrial capacity was impressive by any measure, but it was not enough. They were fighting a war of attrition against an enemy that grew stronger with every victory while they grew weaker with every defeat. "There is one option we have not discussed," Admiral Nexus continued, his voice dropping to a tone that Lyra had never heard from him before. It was the sound of a proud leader being forced to consider the unthinkable. "The Council has voted to authorize first contact with the species from Sol 3. The command center fell silent. Every officer, technician, and analyst stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at the Admiral's hologram. The mention of Sol 3 sent a ripple of unease through the chamber that was almost palpable. Sol 3, known to its inhabitants as Earth, was classified as a Class 12 death world in the Galactic Survey database. It was a planet so hostile to most forms of life that the very idea of intelligent beings evolving there seemed impossible. The gravity was crushing by galactic standards. The atmosphere was corrosive to most species. The weather patterns were violent and unpredictable. Most disturbing of all, the planet was home to an ecosystem where survival required constant violence, where every creature was either predator or prey, often both. The species that had evolved on this nightmare world, calling themselves humans, had only been discovered 50 cycles ago by a long-range survey probe. The initial reports had been dismissed as sensor errors. Surely no sapient race could develop under such conditions. But subsequent investigations confirmed the impossible. Not only had intelligence evolved on Sol 3, but it had reached technological sophistication despite the planet actively trying to kill its inhabitants every moment of their existence. "Sir, the psychological profiles from our xenobiology division suggest the humans may be unsuitable for Alliance cooperation," Lieutenant Commander Kale said carefully. "Their entire evolutionary history is one of warfare and survival against impossible odds. They have never known peace as we understand it." Admiral Nexus's expression grew even more grave. "That is precisely why the Council believes they might be our only hope. The swarm operates by rules we cannot comprehend, using tactics that horrify us. Perhaps we need allies who understand horror as intimately as they do." The debate that followed would have been unthinkable just cycles ago. The Alliance had been founded on principles of peaceful cooperation, mutual respect, and the advancement of all sentient life. The idea of recruiting what were essentially galactic barbarians as mercenaries went against everything they stood for. But desperation has a way of changing perspectives that once seemed immutable. Dr. Senna, the station's chief xenobiologist, accessed her data files and projected detailed analysis of human physiology and psychology. The information was disturbing to contemplate. Humans were adapted for persistence hunting, capable of pursuing prey across vast distances until their targets collapsed from exhaustion. Their pain tolerance was extraordinary by galactic standards. They could function with injuries that would incapacitate most species. Perhaps most unsettling was their pack behavior. While most intelligent species had evolved beyond tribal warfare, humanity had weaponized cooperation itself. They formed units that functioned with deadly efficiency, each individual willing to sacrifice themselves for the success of the group. Their military history was a catalog of impossible victories achieved through tactics that other species would consider suicidal. The transmission logs from their probe encounters suggest they are already aware of the galactic community, Dr. Senna reported. Their responses to our standard greeting protocols were unusual. Instead of expressing wonder or fear, they asked detailed questions about galactic politics, military capabilities, and potential threats. They were evaluating us as allies, or enemies from the first moment of contact, Lyra realized. While we were marveling at making first contact with a new species, they were conducting intelligence-gathering operations. The decision was ultimately inevitable. With the swarm advancing and conventional strategies proving useless, the Alliance had no choice but to gamble on the unknown. The formal first contact protocol was activated, and a carefully crafted message was transmitted toward the Sol system. It was a plea for help that no member of the Alliance had ever imagined needing to make. The human response arrived faster than anyone expected, transmitted with technology that seemed primitive but proved surprisingly effective. The message was brief, professional, and somehow more intimidating because of its simplicity. Message received and acknowledged. Terran Expeditionary Force Alpha is deploying to assist Alliance operations against hostile entities. Estimated arrival time, 36 standard cycles. Command authority, Captain Marcus Chen, Terran Space Navy. Advisory, we specialize in asymmetric warfare against overwhelming odds. Recommend Alliance forces maintain safe distance during initial engagement. As Commander Lyra Voss stared at the message, she felt a mixture of hope and apprehension that she had never experienced before. Help was coming from the depths of space, carried by beings who had learned to fight and win against impossible odds on a world that tried to kill them every day of their lives. She only hoped that calling the Deathworlders would not prove to be a cure worse than the disease they were fighting. The Void Swarm had shown them that the galaxy contained horrors beyond their imagination. Now they were about to discover what horrors could emerge from the depths of a death world when its children decided to go to war. The countdown to humanity's arrival had begun, and with it the most uncertain chapter in the Alliance's long history. As Lyra watched the tactical displays showing the swarm's relentless advance, she found herself praying to deities she had never believed in that they had made the right choice. The humans were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Deathworld Solution. The human fleet arrived at Kepler Station with the subtle grace of predators entering new territory. Commander Lyra Voss watched from the observation deck as 12 vessels emerged from hyperspace, their dark hulls scarred and patched from countless battles. Unlike the elegant curves and gleaming surfaces that characterized Alliance ship design, these craft looked like they had been built in the forges of war itself. Captain Marcus Chen's face appeared on the main communication screen, and Lyra felt an involuntary shiver run through her crystalline structure. The human looked older than his species' typical lifespan suggested, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines etched deep around eyes that seemed to have seen too much. But it was those eyes that truly unsettled her. They held a calm intensity that spoke of someone who had faced death so many times that it had become an old acquaintance. Alliance Command, this is Captain Chen of the TES Indomitable, the human said, his voice carrying an accent that the translation matrix struggled to interpret. We have reviewed your tactical data during our transit. Recommend immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel from all forward positions. We estimate 6 hours before the swarm reaches this position. Admiral Nexus, who had arrived at Kepler Station specifically to coordinate with the human forces, leaned forward in his command chair. Captain Chen, our long-range sensors show no sign of swarm activity in this sector. The nearest confirmed sighting was 3 systems away. A ghost of a smile crossed the human's face, and Lyra found it more disturbing than reassuring. Admiral, with respect, your sensors are designed to detect conventional threats. The swarm scouts have been observing this station for the past 18 hours. They are using what we call stealth biologics, organisms that mimic space debris while gathering intelligence. The implications hit the Alliance officers like a cold wave. Lieutenant Commander Kale's forearms moved frantically across his console, initiating deep spectrum scans of the surrounding space. Within minutes, his findings confirmed the human's assessment. Dozens of objects previously classified as harmless. Debris showed subtle signs of organic activity. How did you detect them when our advanced sensor arrays could not? Dr. Senna asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her apprehension. Different paradigm, Captain Chen replied simply. You scan for what should be there. We scan for what shouldn't be there. On Earth, the thing that looks like a stick might be the snake that kills you. The first human shuttle to dock with Kepler Station brought a revelation that would fundamentally change how the Alliance viewed their new allies. The airlock cycled, and Captain Chen stepped through, followed by what could only be described as the most dangerous-looking group of beings Lyra had ever encountered. The humans were shorter than most Alliance species, but built with a compact density that spoke of incredible physical capability. Their equipment was a fascinating mixture of advanced technology and what appeared to be primitive redundancy systems. Each soldier carried weapons that looked crude by galactic standards, but showed the wear patterns of extensive use. What truly shocked the Alliance officers was the casual way the humans adapted to the station's environment. The gravity was set to Alliance standard, which should have been uncomfortably light for beings evolved on a high-gravity world. Instead of struggling with the reduced weight, the humans moved with fluid precision, instinctively adjusting their movements to take advantage of the conditions. Your station's atmosphere has a 13% higher oxygen content than Earth standard, observed Lieutenant Sarah Kim, the human team's environmental specialist. This will improve our combat endurance by approximately 22%. Fortuitous. Dr. Senna stared at the compact woman in amazement. You just performed complex atmospheric analysis in your head while walking through an airlock? Environmental awareness is basic survival training, Lieutenant Kim replied with a shrug that somehow managed to convey that this was obvious to anyone with sense. On our world, not knowing the exact composition of your environment gets you killed in about 30 different ways. The briefing that followed introduced the Alliance officers to concepts of warfare that existed far outside their understanding. Captain Chen and his team analyzed the swarm's attack patterns with a cold efficiency that treated mass destruction as an engineering problem to be solved rather than a tragedy to be mourned. The swarm operates on hive mind principles, explained Major David Torres, the team's tactical analyst. Individual units have limited autonomy but share collective memory and learning. This creates both vulnerabilities and advantages. We have studied their collective behavior extensively, Admiral Nexus said. Our psychologists believe their unity makes them nearly impossible to demoralize or confuse. Major Torres exchanged a look with Captain Chen that spoke of shared knowledge earned through hard experience. Admiral, respectfully, your psychologists have never dealt with a true hive mind. There are ways to turn unity into weakness if you understand the underlying mechanics. The explanation that followed was a masterclass in human strategic thinking, where the Alliance saw an overwhelming enemy, the humans saw a complex system with multiple points of failure. They had identified ways to introduce contradictory information into the swarm's collective consciousness, potentially causing command paralysis at critical moments. The key is understanding that their greatest strength is also their greatest vulnerability, Captain Chen explained, manipulating the holographic display to show swarm movement patterns. They share everything instantly, which makes them incredibly coordinated, but it also means that false information spreads just as quickly as real intelligence. You are suggesting psychological warfare against a collective consciousness, Commander Lyra said, trying to wrap her mind around the concept. How do you deceive an entity that shares the experiences of millions of individual units? Same way. You fool any predator? Replied Sergeant Ana Rodriguez, speaking for the first time since entering the briefing room. You make them think they are hunting when they are actually being hunted. The swarm attack began exactly 6 hours after Captain Chen's prediction, arriving with the inexorable force of a natural disaster. Long-range sensors detected the approaching bioships while they were still hours away from the station, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. The Alliance fleet moved into standard defensive formation, their ships arranged in overlapping fields of fire, designed to create maximum coverage with minimum risk. It was a formation that had been refined over centuries of peacekeeping operations and had proven effective against conventional threats. The human ships did something that made every Alliance officer question their understanding of basic military tactics. Instead of joining the defensive formation, they scattered across the system in what appeared to be completely random patterns. Some headed toward the system's asteroid belt, others accelerated toward the inner planets, and a few seemed to be retreating toward the edge of the system entirely. Captain Chen, your ships appear to be out of position, Admiral Nexus transmitted, his voice tight with concern. Our tactical doctrine requires concentrated firepower to achieve maximum effectiveness. Admiral, our tactical doctrine assumes that concentrated firepower is what the enemy expects, came the reply. We find that enemies have trouble shooting at targets they cannot predict or understand. The swarm fleet that emerged from hyperspace was a nightmare made manifest. Over 200 bioships of various sizes advanced in perfect coordination, their hulls rippling with organic movement that suggested they were more grown than built. The largest vessels were kilometers long, looking like massive sea creatures adapted for the vacuum of space. The Alliance fleet opened fire according to standard protocols, their energy weapons creating brilliant displays of coordinated destruction. The initial volleys struck home, tearing chunks from swarm bioships and causing explosions of organic matter that scattered across space. For a moment it seemed like the defensive strategy might succeed. Then the swarm adapted. The bioships' hulls began shifting and changing, developing reflective surfaces that deflected energy weapons and redundant organ systems that allowed them to function despite massive damage. Within minutes, the same weapons that had initially proven effective were barely causing scratches. Their adaptation rate has increased by 40% since our last engagement, reported Lieutenant Commander Kale, his voice showing the strain of watching their weapons become useless in real time. At this rate, our defensive capabilities will be completely neutralized within the hour. That was when the humans struck. The ships that had seemed to retreat toward the system's edge suddenly reversed course, accelerating at rates that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. They were not retreating at all. They had been positioning themselves for an attack that used the entire solar system as their battlefield. The first sign that humanity fought by different rules came when 2 human destroyers opened fire with weapons that violated several galactic conventions on civilized warfare. Instead of clean energy beams or guided missiles, the human ships launched solid projectiles at incredible velocities. The crude kinetic weapons punched through swarm biohulls like they were made of tissue paper, causing massive internal damage that the aliens' adaptive capabilities could not quickly compensate. 4. What kind of weapons are those? Dr. Senna asked, staring at the tactical display in amazement. Railguns, Captain Chen replied matter-of-factly. Electromagnetically accelerated tungsten rods. Primitive technology by your standards, but the laws of physics remain constant throughout the galaxy. Kinetic energy is kinetic energy. But the real surprise was yet to come. The human ships that had positioned themselves in the asteroid belt suddenly activated what appeared to be mining equipment. Within minutes, they were launching a steady stream of asteroidal debris toward the swarm fleet, turning the local environment into a weapon. They are using the system's own matter as ammunition, Admiral Nexus observed, his voice filled with something approaching awe. They turned our defensive position into an offensive platform. The psychological warfare component of the human strategy became apparent when intercepted. Swarm communications began showing signs of confusion and contradictory orders. The humans had somehow introduced false sensor data into the collective consciousness, making the swarm believe they were under attack from multiple directions while their actual enemies remained partially hidden. Major Torres had been busy during the journey to Kepler Station, analyzing captured swarm biotechnology and developing countermeasures that exploited the very nature of their collective intelligence. By broadcasting specific electromagnetic frequencies that mimicked swarm communication protocols, the humans were feeding false information directly into the enemy's shared consciousness. The beauty of a hive mind is that everyone believes what the collective knows, Major Torres explained as confused swarm units began firing on empty space. The tragedy of a hive mind is that everyone believes what the collective knows, even when it is wrong. The battle reached its climax when Captain Chen implemented what he called the Deathworld solution. The human ships that had been maneuvering near the system's star suddenly released their cargo, clouds of Earth-native bacteria that had been specially modified for vacuum survival. The microorganisms were designed to consume the specific organic compounds that made up swarm bioships. "You are using biological weapons," Admiral Nexus said, his voice carrying a mixture of horror and admiration. "We are using Earth's immune system," Captain Chen corrected. "These organisms evolved to break down organic matter in Earth's most extreme environments. They are simply doing what they have always done, just in a different location." The effect on the swarm fleet was devastating. The alien bioships began dissolving from the inside out as Earth's microscopic predators consumed their cellular structure faster than their adaptive systems could compensate. Within hours, the massive fleet that had seemed unstoppable was reduced to scattered debris and fleeing survivors. As the last swarm vessels retreated into hyperspace, Commander Lyra Voss found herself looking at the human fleet with new understanding. These were not just warriors or soldiers. They were the end result of 4 billion years of evolution on a world where only the most adaptable, most creative, and most ruthless survived. "Captain Chen," she transmitted, "on behalf of the Alliance, I want to thank you for your assistance. Your tactics were unconventional but undeniably effective." The human captain's response carried a note of something that might have been amusement. "Commander, we have been fighting for survival since before our species learned to make fire. Everything is unconventional when your life depends on it." In the days that followed, as Alliance engineers studied human technology and tactics, a new understanding emerged. Earth had not just produced warriors, it had produced innovators who treated survival as an art form and warfare as applied creativity. They had learned to see opportunity where others saw only threat, to find advantage where others found only disadvantage. The formal treaty that established humanity's place in the galactic community was signed 3 cycles later. The Terran Expeditionary Force became the Alliance's rapid response unit, specializing in threats that conventional forces could not handle. They were the immune system that peaceful civilizations needed to survive in a galaxy that contained wonders and horrors in equal measure. As Commander Lyra Voss watched the human ships prepare for their next mission, she reflected on how much the galaxy had changed since their arrival. The Alliance had learned that sometimes to preserve peace, you needed allies who understood war at its most fundamental level. The humans had shown them that evolution on a death world produced more than just survivors. It produced problem solvers who refused to accept that any challenge was insurmountable, who turned every disadvantage into an advantage, and who never gave up as long as there was still a fight to be won. The galaxy was a safer place with humanity in it, even if it was also a more dangerous place for the galaxy's enemies. The Deathworlders had answered the call, and they had brought with them the most powerful weapon of all, the unshakable conviction that there was always a solution if you were creative enough, desperate enough, and stubborn enough to find it.